Webinars are geared to help you develop competencies, to help you grow in your everyday life, in your workplace. You wrap all up, and that drives the quality of the output or the quality of the deliverables that you have on a project. Two key drivers are your work breakdown structure and your risk breakdown structure. It drives us and keeps us focused.
PQC International, powered by measurable solutions. We do not compensate effort, we compensate measurable results.
Hello and welcome to the WPQC series of webinars. My name is Meeta and I will be your host for today. Thank you for joining us for Riskonomics, a scalable risk mitigation process webinar. Before we start, I ask that you please type your questions in the chat window throughout the presentation. Our presenter will answer them at the end of his presentation. This today is facilitated by Project Management Evangelist and CEO of PQC International, Frank Payne. Frank has over 20 years of field-tested experience from corporations and has also served as a U.S. Army combat commander. His expansive experience spans information technology, process improvement, construction, manufacturing, and human resources projects across diverse regions globally. I'd also like to let all PMPs in the audience here today know that we now offer the Riskonomics package on our website. All you need to do is read the book and watch the accompanying DVD and turn in a synopsis for expert review. By doing this, you can earn up to 30 PDUs. Please revert to us and let us know if you'd like more information on earning your PDUs. Thank you. I'd like to now turn to our speaker for the day, Frank Payne.
Meeta, for such an introduction to a very special topic in my business life. Today we're going to spend some time talking about Riskonomics, a scalable risk mitigation process. You see, why is Riskonomics so important? What is it? And how should we be taking a look at it? Talk about Riskonomics. I want to make sure that you understand that it's not your old way to talk about or talk about risk management. Presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about risk management, drive you down a path to get you to understand what is Riskonomics. And we should be using Riskonomics because when you talk about Riskonomics, and I write this down, you're talking about looking at risk and economic impact of that risk. Because it's not just what you're used to thinking as project managers or business managers about risk. We can now get into talking about what does that really mean. I always ask people, why are you afraid of the R word? You're afraid to talk about risk. When you listen to my voice today, afraid to even talk about risk in your organization, you make up things that don't make any sense because trying to avoid a word is real. Woke up this morning, took a risk to even get out of bed this morning. When you went on the way to work this morning, took a risk getting into your car, even driving to work this morning, because you had no clue of the risk you were going to face today on the way to work. Something as simple as going to work. When you went to lunch today, you took a risk with what you ate today. Was you ate it or you was in a restaurant? See, ladies and gentlemen, risk is everywhere we go. So why are you afraid of the risk word? Too many of you have had bad experiences with your bosses that report bad news, afraid that somebody's going to embarrass you, or that you may get fired because of what you're reporting. really help you focus on the truth. So I'm going to deal with this and talk about Riskonomics, because see, Riskonomics addresses the triple constraint. Riskonomics talks about scope. What is being asked of you to develop? It's about you trying to create. How are you going to schedule it? What is the impact of the schedule on the scope you're trying to do? And how does cost impact it? And then the triple constraint together is quality. When you begin to talk about Riskonomics, as I said earlier, you're talking about the impact of risk and economic impact of it. You bought car insurance for your car. I hope most of you have car insurance. Now, when the last time have you used that car insurance? See, you bought the car insurance in case something happened. This is there every minute of the day on the car. Whether you're driving the car, whether somebody else is driving the car, or whether it's sitting in your garage or in the parking lot. Your car is at risk. So you bought insurance in case, just in case risk out and begin to cause a problem. But the same thing in business. You begin to look at risk and the economic impact of it. So again, schedule, cost, and scope. What they hold us all together. See, Riskonomics addresses the triple constraint. I want to remind those of you that's on the call that are PMPs. PMI has taken a step and has created another certification called the RMP. And this certification, for those of you that want to become certified in the area of risk. Again, just a footnote for you, you can go to www.pmi.org and get more information on this particular certification. I want to make sure that those of you that are project managers that look at this certification, is a very good certification to have for those of you that want to take risks to the next level. So let's talk about this. You look at this slide and you say, oh my goodness, I'm not a math major. I don't even like math. Well, this is about math. This slide here is giving you a picture of the complexity of risk. We don't know when certain things are going to happen. We know the impact of certain risk events that may happen. Risk has its own level of complexity. Complexity that will drive you crazy if you cannot get your arms wrapped around what those complexities are on projects that you're running or business operations that you're running. You got to take the time to begin to understand what are risk events that I'm facing, what are the impact of those risk events, and what are the probability of those risks occurring in my business or on my project or my program. So there is a level of complexity that you must understand with dealing with risk. Here we're talking about how Riskonomics is going to bring things to light, how Riskonomics is going to help you better understand the complexity of risk and how to focus on dealing with those complexities as you drive forward. So let's look at some fundamental concepts. One is risk management. Project managers, business managers, you've heard this before. When we talk risk management, it's a management discipline based on the continuous, keyword here, continuous application and control of events that cause unwanted change. Think of this. The word continuous means that it's 24/7. 24/7. You can do nothing about it. Control is that you may or may not be able to handle. The other word is event. For anything you're doing in your business or your project, there are risk events associated with it. Some be large, some small. We don't know. But it's your job to figure out what those are, because what this statement says, in many cases when risk shows up, it creates an unwanted change. An unwanted change happens in many cases because we're not paying attention to what's going on our project or within the business operations that we're responsible for. Ability is Management requires a connection among a couple of things. Got a connection with risk management. Project planning and tracking is absolutely just very critical that you make sure you understand what those are. Measure risk and the metrics or the key performance indicators for risk. Process improvement, because when we talk about process improvement activities, we talk about looking at it from a continuous improvement process. And then I need to have a sponsor in my project or in my business to help me, somebody that can help me drive this whole thing, the whole concept about risk home. Because many corporations, many departments, many organizations don't take risk seriously until risk shows up in a wanted situation. We begin to understand that risk is everywhere. Risk is going to be in everything you do. You have to decide how I'm going to identify what these things are. What are those events that could damage my project, damage my business operation, or damage me? You got to begin to take some time to understand the fundamental concepts of risk. As we're going to talk about that, one of the things is a risk management strategy. Now, when we talk about that strategy, we're talking about something that is going to look at the scope, the business scope of the project, and how does that tie into my risk management efforts? Because those things together will guide what you do and how you do it. Those are the tools that I use for risk management. See, don't tell me that you got risk, your risk plan in your head. I'm not going to buy that. What you're telling me is you don't have a risk management plan. You don't understand the risk. You don't know what the risks are. You've done no risk analysis. You've done no risk mitigation. You haven't even touched risk monitoring. You have not even communicated the risk events to the other part of your organization. See, you got to begin to have a plan in place. You can't have a plan unless you identify what those risks are. Specific source of risk, where does it come from? Where you come from in your business, on your project? This guy said, where are the sources of risk? And be very, very, very clear about what those are. And how to organize this? How do I classify risk? Because risk will come from all kinds of places. They can come from marketing, they come from IT, they can come from your suppliers, they can come from processes, they can come from all kinds of places. And there's parameters and criteria for taking action that once you identify these risks. So you got to have not just a risk management plan, but you must have a risk management strategy in place in order to help you drive and focus on how you're going to make the business move forward. And that is key. You got to focus on what those things are. Then we start talking about risk mitigation. Risk mitigation says, okay, what if this thing happens? What do you got? Techniques in place. You run some prototyping. You run simulations on what you're doing before you do it. You got some backup plan. You got somebody that's responsible for the controlling or approval levels that risk should show up, that you have the right responsibility in place to deal with it. I show that monitoring is critical on my project. Time interval. How do I monitor this? Do I monitor this every 12 hours, a week, every month? What is it? What drives that? The answer to that is it depends upon the criticality of the project you're working on. If you're working on a space shuttle project and you're going to launch somebody into space, you make monitoring risk every 5 minutes. Building a bridge somewhere, may I monitor risk on a weekly basis. Building a building, may I monitor risk on a daily basis for the safety of the people working on these projects. See, again, it depends upon the critical what you're doing, but the research strategy, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely very critical. So one of the things I need to think about when I think about developing and writing risk statements that make sense. Things I need to do. This formula here says risk equals probability times impact. Now, risk equals probability times impact. Let's talk about this formula for just a second. Look at a risk event, the severity or the importance of this thing, And then to say the ability, the impact. Example, if I tell you that on Friday at 12 noon in your city, wherever you sit right now, that nuclear bomb is going to be dropped on your city. Hey, Frank, you have lost your mind. Well, not necessarily. What you concerned about? We won't be concerned about what are the risk events right now. I'm going to plan for one of those risk events if a nuclear bomb was to hit my city where I'm sitting. Second thing I'm going to be concerned about is what are the impacts? I said all of the impact of these risk events on it. Now, people say, well, the probability of that happening is 0. Well, it's a low probability of that happening, but I'm telling you is more important than the probability or the impact. So don't come up on probability. I don't care if you tell me it's a 5% probability or a 100% probability. I'm more concerned about the impact because impact says, here's what I'm going to do about it if that should happen. When we talk about risk, I make sure that I understand how to structure a risk statement, how to write one. If you're talking about it, said, if an event happens, then, so I have a if-then statement here. If the adverse event happens, then I do impact. Here's an example. If a customer does not identify a key user requirement for the adverse event, then the system will not perform as the user's desire, and customer satisfaction will be diminished by 50%. See, you have to begin, ladies and gentlemen, to write risk statements correctly. Risk statements have to make sense. They have to be written in a way that you can deal with very clearly what's going to happen if this thing should happen. Structured risk statement says that I must deal with an if-then statement to make sure that those around me can understand the adverse effect and the impact if a risk should occur in my business or on my project. Very critical to be. Do not violate this rule. Structured risk statements are absolutely critical. If you fail to write these correctly, when Murphy shows up on your project, you will get burned. Murphy's going to eat your lunch. So I strongly recommend you begin to practice writing structured risk statements because that is absolutely critical as to how we do that. The other thing is, when I look at this, the impact should be one thing: cost, satisfaction, quality. So my statement has to address one of these items. Addressing one of these things, you must go back and ask yourself, why in the world am I dealing with this particular statement? Because it's not focusing on something that is quantifiable, something that I can control, something that I can measure. I tell you now, go back and view the structured risk statement. Does it make sense? Does it impact cost? Does it impact a schedule? Does it impact customer satisfaction? Does it impact quality? 1 4 need to be addressed in each of your risk statements. That's critical. Now, so what do we mean when we say risk management? Well, according to the project management body of knowledge, the 4th edition, here's what the box says. Objectives of risk management are increase the probability and impact of positive events. Look at positive events and decrease probability and impact of adverse to you got to begin to understand what is risk management. Management says there are some risk processes that go with this: risk identification, risk down structure, risk and controlling, and very, very important is risk response planning. Because risk response planning is a document that says if this risk should occur, here's how we plan to respond in a mitigation process so that we can deal with that without it having a real adverse effect upon our business or upon our project. This is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely critical to understand the components and the processes dealing with risk management. Now, so what is risk? Look at these beautiful words here. An uncertain event. Uncertain event. Write that down. Uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has an effect on at least one project objective. At least one project objective. See, uncertain event. When I told you got out of bed this morning, you rolled out of bed this morning, had a night's sleep, walking out of your master bedroom into your master bath. You get beautiful marble floors, and you slipped, fell, and broke your leg. That was an uncertain event, okay? Occurred in your house. You had a good night's sleep. You took Tylenol PM last night. You slept well, and get in the morning, slipped in the bathroom, and broke your leg. You control over that. So we're saying to you, understand what I'm talking about. Whether it's risk in your life, personal life, in your business life, in your family life, you need to begin to take risk serious, ladies and gentlemen. Because when we talk about this, project risk is always in the future, can have multiple causes, it may have multiple impacts. About business, these three bullets talk about what is risk and what you need to be thinking about and how you need to be addressing it in a different way. So take risk very serious. What are these objectives? Says that to increase the probability and impact of positive events and decrease the probability and impact of negative events on the project. So what do we mean by that? We need to focus on planned risk management. We need to talk about how do we identify risk. You can only identify, write this down. You can only identify risk if you've done a phenomenal job of writing quantifiable, simply measurable, listen carefully, requirements. If you have foo-foo requirements, you're going to have a foo-foo risk plan. If you've written good requirements that are measurable, that are smart, that meet the 5 W's, you have an outstanding risk plan that you do an outstanding job of doing risk plan and control. You need to think about quantitative risk analysis and qualitative risk analysis. Plan risk response. Then you focus on monitoring control. How to do that? It's back to the quality of your requirements. Did you write good requirements? Are the requirements testable? Requirement written in the 5 W's. Are the requirements written smart? One of you got to happen. Because I cannot test requirements that are not written smart or written in 5 W format. And if they're not written in those formats, I cannot develop good risk events on those requirements. It all goes back to the quality of your requirements. I cannot deal with it unless I have great requirements. So, here is one of my favorite pictures. They're talking about the Big Dig in Boston. Most of us probably heard of the Big Dig. You know that Boston is an old city, built on top of many areas of the city. And again, to do the Big Dig, they had done some risk planning. They have done some planning, but they had done a great job of risk planning. And what happened is, the further down into the city they were digging, the more problems they found, the more infrastructure problems they found. The further down they were digging, the more issues they found, which created more and more and more risk. You can go look this up, but many program managers were fired because of this project, because they did not do good risk management on this, which eventually cost the government and the city billions of dollars to get this project done, and it was beyond the word of being past a schedule. This example of risk events not being quantifiable along with the requirements that were done. And also an example of very poor change control that drove this project into billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. So how do I identify problem. Because I'll tell you right now, with problems, project are requirements. You must be able to understand how to identify the problem, because I tell you right now, projects are birthed out of problems. I say again, projects are birthed out of problems. So you must understand the who and what. And understand the who and what, if you understand the where, the size, and the impact of what you're about to get yourself into. Because if you have a big problem, you have a big project. If you have a big project, you have many risks to deal with. So the size of it is going to drive the impact. And so you got to begin to be able to identify the problem that can help you drive and understand what are those requirements that's going to drive this project or this program that you're about to undertake. The other piece is your stakeholders. There are types of stakeholders that you got to understand. And I don't care if you get nothing else out of what I'm telling you today. Know that you have two types of stakeholders, because these are who you're going to get your information from. The first type is the project stakeholder. See, this definition of a project stakeholder. A project stakeholder is anyone that has a vested interest in the outcome of the deliverables. A vested interest in the outcome of the deliverables. These are the people that are concerned about making sure this happens. The second type are goal stakeholders. A goal stakeholder is defined as anyone that has power and influence over your project, but is part of your project. See, they have power and influence over your project. Now, to talk about this, who are we talking about? We're talking about project stakeholders are the people that, like the sponsor, the project manager, the project team, the end users. See, you got to begin to go gather those requirements we're talking about that define the problem from the project stakeholder, not those stakeholders. I say again, not the goal stakeholder. All your requirement gathering need to come from your project stakeholder. They have a vested interest in that project. They make sure things are running right. They want to make sure things are going the way it's supposed to be going so that they can help solve the problem. That's what we're here for, to bring a value-added solution to the problem. And absolutely critical. So, how to gather requirements? There are 4 types of requirements on projects. And you figure out how do you fit in and how do you get these requirements from who? I hear you. From who? Project stakeholders. Say project stakeholders. Say it, everybody. Project stakeholders. How are you going to make this happen? There are 4 types of requirements. One is functional requirements. How to begin to understand what are those functional requirements that is driving the problem. Now, there's another group that are non-functional requirements. These are requirements that may not be relevant to the overall project, but they have significant impact on what you're doing. Then you requirements. These requirements that are just jumping out at you in a jazz session. I mean, they gather them on Post-it notes, they pull them all down. But then there's that last group, those hidden requirements. Hidden requirements are requirements that are unknown in a way. They're hidden. They're there because you didn't gather all of the expectations that people have. These are things that people forgot to tell you, or people are afraid to tell you. You got to find a way to pull those things out. So you got to begin to get a handle on the 4 types of requirements, because it's your responsibility to figure out, to gather those requirements, to make sure you have something in place to drive this. Now, are you going to be perfect with this? No, you're not. You're not perfect with this. So, Frank, how do I do this if I'm not going to be perfect with it? You need to make sure that you have a very strong, proactive change control process in place. you do not have a change control process in place, go home. Go on vacation. You're up because you're going to mess up. You begin to focus on how we do this. Now, so you begin to gather requirements. You need to make sure you understand risk tolerance. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But see, risk tolerance is touching the cost of the project, the scope of the project, the quality, the satisfaction, risk, and time. Then you say, well, what do you mean by this risk tolerance thing? Okay? Risk tolerance talks about what is your level of sensitivity to cost. Are you okay with a cost range of plus or minus 30%? Or are you one of those people that are tight on cost, plus 5%? Okay? And so you got to begin to understand, number one, what is your risk tolerance? Number two, what are the risk tolerance of your team members? Number three, what the risk tolerance of your project sponsor? And lastly, but more importantly, what is the risk tolerance of your client, your end user? Because I'm telling you right now, you are like me, a high risk taker, and looking for a client that is a low risk taker that's afraid to even pick up a knife because they're afraid they may stab themselves. They're a risk taker. If you're a high risk taker, you got to understand and be sensitive to a low risk taker because she be freaking out because style. Tolerance is very important for you to understand. Make sure you understand how to deal with risk tolerance. Now, so we all this stuff we're talking about, we say, but gee whiz, man, Frank, there are so many types of risk out there. Talk about a couple of them. One is scope risk. We were talking about that. Scope risk deals with something called scope creep. And I know everybody listen to my voice have met with Mr. and Mrs. Scope creep. They go up at the water cooler, go up in email messages that come to you. So here's some things around scope risk. Hardware defects, software defects, scope gap, dependency chain, integration, all this stuff deal with scope. There's schedule risk, product dependency, part not coming on time, estimate errors, decision delay from senior management, hard delay, schedule risk, another resource risk. You got outsourcing issues, lack of funds for your project, a resource, people going to other projects, people in other departments, people on your team late, skills. You got a whole lot of bodies on your project, but you got the right skills and the right competencies on your project. See, there's some of the type of risks that you got to be considering. See here, I want you to think and listen to what I just said about risk. We're talking about the impact of Riskonomics on everything that you're doing. We're talking about how to drive this. We're talking about how do we make sure that risk does not destroy my career, that risk does not destroy my project, that risk does not destroy my company or my program. These are things you got to begin to understand and talk about. So how do we deal with this risk assessment piece then? I always tell people that we talk about the impact and the probability. Well, you look at quantitative and qualitative risk analysis. See, quantitative says that let's look at qualitative first. So if I look at qualitative, I'm looking at subjectivity. How do I evaluate probability? How do I evaluate impact? Okay, what about a list of risks and deciding to set up a stage gate process to have go or no go decisions on risk? What about quantitative? It says decide which risk warrants response. Because you may come up with 500 risks on your project. You can't do it with 500 risks. You have to prioritize them. You got to come up with some valuation system. Okay, now be careful. Be careful. You have some quantitative risk on the front end of your project, but remember, risk is managed throughout the life cycle of the project, not at the front end, not at the middle, not at the end. Risk be throughout the life cycle of the project, because risks that were there at the beginning, maybe they're 3 months later, maybe they're 6 months later, or risk that shows up 6 months into your project was even known at the beginning of the project. Risk is something that you must manage in the life cycle of your project. So, risk registry, you review it the same way you would do any other project document. Some frequency, whether weekly, every 2 weeks, 1 month, no more than once a month. Go past once a month, you may not have it. You don't even need to have one. You're wasting your time. I want people to review it at least every 2 weeks. But the project may be sensitive, well, you may have to review it weekly. Or you may have to be running a very critical project where risk looked at on a daily basis. So you got to begin to look at how do you assess risk. There are 2 components of risk that you must be concerned about. One is threat. What threat? Don't do nothing. What threat? What threat? It's the cost. What's the cost? I tell you this. Our people's career destroyed because they didn't pay attention to the 3 components of risk. Look at ability. How vulnerable am I? My project, my company. How vulnerable are we? I be looking at these 3 components because people have lost their careers because they didn't pay attention to risk. They ain't part of the risk and jobs because something went wrong. Went wrong real bad. 3 components of risk: threat, cost, and vulnerability. It's something you have to take time, begin to look at, talk about it, understand it, and discuss it in detail with team, with customers, and with your sponsor. So Frank said, I need to be looking at this all the time. Yes, you do. You need to walk back, step back, and even begin to talk about how to audit it. A type of project data, tools, operating system, technology. So I gotta have something in place to audit. Now, you don't audit yourself. You have a system in place to have somebody internal to your organization or externally set up on your project come in to audit your project for risk. Identify business activities and process that need to be dealt with. I look at profile of significant business unit or departments and say, are we bringing risk upon them? I need some kind of scoring system I can rank and evaluate the risk, so where my control parameters are as I deal with the risk. And I'm going to make sure that I implement this audit plan. Because once I get audited, I don't have to go execute those things and fix what the audit say I have problems. Take the audit back in an unannounced way to make sure we have fixed those things in a timely fashion and decide, more importantly, to continue throughout the life cycle of the project to have some type of periodic audit to help me to understand where are we doing the right thing, are we doing it the right way, in the right time. Risks are very important. Don't be afraid of an audit. It's a good thing. Now, so, okay, I can risk audit, so what are some of the steps I need to consider? I say, first of all, when I look at the risk audit, the 3 things I want to make sure I have is I can identify what those items are, that I can manage them, I can implement, okay? Because I need to know what is the data that I want to collect. Because if you collect, like I said earlier, if you collect foo-foo data, you get a foo-foo result. The quality, understandable data that you're gathering, you have some factual data you can make business decisions to drive your business and your project the right way. There's my process. What's my process? What's my profile? What's scoring? I'm not going to score what I'm doing. How am I going to ensure that I understand that what I'm doing makes sense? I make sure I understand that the audit makes sense. Here's what you want to look at. Implement audit plan throughout phases of a project. Make sure you look at how to do data gathering, the processes, the profile, and very importantly, the scoring of what the audit's telling you to do. Good stuff. I mean, I'm having such fun talking about that. I'm about to just jump up down in my office here. This is good stuff. So, how do I respond, Frank? I respond to, well, we talk about data, and that can be done through brainstorming scenarios. So that helped me to identify it. Then there's the likelihood of the occurrence. Well, that means that I need to understand the severity if this thing should hit me. So I'm able to evaluate what will happen. I need to be able to understand how do I deal with this. Once I've evaluated, then I have some options, right? I manage this. Well, I have 4 options. I can avoid the risk. I can accept the risk. I can transfer the risk or mitigate the risk. See, a risk response procedure that you need to walk through. This is not complicated. This is not rocket science, guys. You begin to take risk seriously. Will bite you. Risk hurt you. Risk hurt your team members. Risk your company. Follow this simple risk response plan, process, and procedure here to make sense of what you're doing. You say, but I don't have time to deal with risk. Yes, you do. When one has no time, one makes time. It's important that you deal with risk in a quantitative way. So measure what counts. You know, we talked about requirements. Well, see, requirements are going to help drive my project work breakdown structure. If I understand what the requirements are in the work breakdown structure, then that allows me to build my risk breakdown structure. Because requirement number 1.0 have risk for 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. You identify the risk on each requirement and develop a risk breakdown structure, which helps you to understand how to drive and deal with the risk capability maturity model. And then in some real deep stuff, you need to do a failure mode and effects analysis, depending upon the criticality of the risk you're dealing with on your project. But see, you can look at what counts. What do I need to measure? You need to measure everything, but you need to, along with your project stakeholders, understand what do I need to be measured, how do I need to measure different things to try where I am. 5 levels of the risk capability maturity model. And these real quick, you see the screen here. It goes being able to go from level 1 to level 5. But what you try to be most of the time, you're not perfect. But it'll be at least around level 3. You got a high probability of being successful. Because level 3 says you have repeatable process in place that help you drive where you are. The other thing is the components of riskonomics. We talk about quantitative and qualitative analysis. The 2 parts that help you keep your focus. To say, am I on track? Am I looking at the right things around risk? 2 things, qualitative and quantitative. 2 concepts you must focus on. So when I talk about risk versus concern versus my problem, we already heard me say that a risk is an event. Come on, a risk is an event. Keep in mind. Now, but see, if you don't yet have a plan, have a concern. See, because you don't have a risk plan, you better be real concerned about what you're doing. I always tell you this: if this comes true, guess what? You have a problem. If this comes true, you have a problem. So I suggest that you take a look at all 3 of these: risk, concern, and problem. That'll help drive where you are. Why miss risk anyway? So many can go wrong. Why should I manage risk? It makes sense. It makes sense to look at it. It makes sense to deal with it. Because the probability of something happening could be devastating to your company, to your team. Set aside some extra resources. Set aside some time and begin to focus on risk. Get involved. Find out what goes wrong. You may be surprised only that risk brings to your project and it drives where you are. Now, riskonomic realities, I'll do these real quick. 4% of capital projects out of the marketplace, significant or major risk problem. That's a big number. 50% of all capital projects are 50% over budget. 23% of all capital projects are more than 100% over budget. 50% of all capital projects deliver, listen to this carefully, less than 50% of promised functionality. Guys, you got to get the requirements right. Get the requirements right, because that's going to help drive what are those risk events that's going to come in and wipe you out. You got to take this serious. So risk events, there are two of them, known, unknown. Well, the known says I know what the requirements are, therefore I can understand what the risks are because they're known, unknown. I know what they are, but I don't know when they're going to happen. Unknown says, guess what? I don't know what those risks are, and I don't know when they're going to happen. But to deal with both, the known, unknown, and the unknown. This is some exciting stuff. Aren't y'all happy on this call right now? I'm teaching y'all about risk. I'm teaching so when you get off this call, you're going to be able to go out and deal with your risk response plan. You're going to be able to go out there and deal with avoidance. You're going to take action to avoid risk. All right? You'll be able to go out and do mitigation. Define the action to take when the risk occurs. You're going to be able to transfer risk. What that means is a good example of transfer says that I got this big old risk and I'm going to buy insurance to protect myself on it. I said earlier, hope most of y'all got car insurance. What you did, transferred your risk to insurance company. You may say, which risk is a real risk? But I'm going to accept this. I would decide that it's an acceptable risk, and it won't hold me up if it should blow up on me. So, a problem statement. Statement defines issues causing abnormal events with a client's environment. I'm going to say, problem statement defines issues causing abnormal events with client environment. Please make sure you have a well-defined problem statement. It helps you to focus on what the requirement is going to be. It drives that. We talk source of risk. This really shows you that we talking about sources. You got internal sources of risk and you got external sources of risk. You get to sit back and say, how do I deal with both of these? What are they? Where are they coming from? And to look at how to deal with those kind of risks. How to drive those pieces. Risk we talked about earlier, risk tolerance are, no client's risk tolerance are, no team members' risk tolerance. How you do with this? Do you understand that if you're a high-risk person, don't freak people out. Chill them down. Focus on other team members. Focus on the customer. Understand what their risk tolerances are. The risk assessment is something that I look at, and I use project management principles. I use 80-hour rule for risk mitigation. I got a risk assessment every 2 weeks on my project. Dealing with a normal situation. If I'm dealing with something that's more sensitive, if I'm dealing with something that's more critical, I have to do it more frequent. On average, you should not go by every 2 weeks without evaluating risk on your project where you are. And that's something that I guarantee you will save your job and credibility with clients. So what do we get here? We talk about risk. We talk about what is Riskonomics. We talk about why you even use Riskonomics. See, think about this. If you things create risk on your project, actually saving your company hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars on projects and programs you're managing. Tell yourself, when you tell your team members, you don't have time to do it. I'm telling you right now, let's think about that. I'm right now that you're going to be in trouble if you do that. Now, to close out, I remind you that I'm standing by right now. I face right now. They jumping up and down here in the room too. They're excited to ask all kinds of questions about Riskonomics. They're excited to hear you ask and to have a discussion with them about risk in your environment. They're just jumping them down now. So you need to ask them a lot of questions so you can walk away from this with an understanding of what risk is all about and what you should be doing about it. Also, you ask them about the Riskonomics book. How can I copy the Riskonomics book? Where can I buy a copy from? I asked them also, where can I get some things right now to better understand if I'm a PMP, how can I get PDUs, how can I get 35 PDUs help me if I study some things about Riskonomics. Now, the team that's going to answer your question right now, ask them about the 35 PDU program. We use 35 PDUs to better understand Riskonomics. 35 PDUs for the project manager. With that, I want to say thank you very much. This has been exciting. I wish I could grab all of you right now and hug you because I know you're excited about risk. I know you're excited about taking it seriously. With that, you have a blessed day and have a good one. Goodbye.
Thank you, Frank, for this informative session. We actually have a panel of risk experts here, headed by Richard Sylvia, who is responsible for operations and marketing at PQC, Tim Shaw, our Chief Technology Officer, and Corbin Hicks, Program Manager and Lead Instructor for several of our HCD boot camps. We do have questions that the audience has typed in. The first question that we have is, when do you develop a risk mitigation plan? Richard, do you want to take that question?
Sure, Amita, I'll take that question. So typically, you don't need to develop a risk mitigation plan for every risk that you've identified on your project. However, you do, as Frank was saying, build a risk breakdown structure that'll pretty mirror your work breakdown structure, understand the impact and probability of all of the various risks that you've identified, and then for those risks that would be considered high, which is based on your risk tolerance level, you actually develop a risk mitigation plan for those risks that will have the greatest impact on your project, whether it's from a schedule perspective, a cost perspective, a quality perspective, or a budget perspective.
Thank you. The second question we have is, what if your risk response plan doesn't fit into your project budget? Or would you like to answer that question?
Sure, I'll take that question. So the question asks about dealing with the project budget that you have and your risk response plan, your risk mitigation. The first thing that you would do would be to reevaluate your risk plan. Frank mentioned that risk is a continuous process. So your very first risk response plan may not be the best plan. You'll want to go about looking at your resources, looking at your requirements, and making sure that the risk plan you've identified is the appropriate risk plan that you're going to use. If you can go through and you can look at your risk plan, you may want to also look at any alternatives. There may be a better option for when you can serve the client. And then finally, if your risk plan that you've identified is the best plan and it still doesn't fit within your budget, then you want to go back to your stakeholders and present to them the reasons why you may need additional funding in order to complete your project.
Thank you, Corbin. We have another question. Should your risk audits be internal, external, or both? Tim, do you want to take that question? And Corbin, you could tag with him if you like.
Okay. I would say there would be both. One on the internal part is because risks can happen anywhere on your project, as well as the external. There are two parts of external. One part is the external, where you have suppliers or workers working with you on your project. But there's also external resources. Frank talked about goal stakeholders, or depending on what type of project you're doing, there's federal regulations and guidelines you have to follow in compliance too. So even that, paying attention, is there new rules or regulations that this project is have to adhere to that initially when we started the project were not available yet.
Corbin, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. And just to piggyback off of what Tim said, you also have to keep in mind about the any confidentiality agreements. So again, when you're working with any external auditors or anybody that can come in and look into your project work, you want to make sure that they adhere to any type of confidentiality agreements and kind of NDAs that you have in place. But you also want to be leveraging whatever your suppliers are going to be doing. So if your suppliers are going to be working on the project, you want to adhere them to the same transparency that you expect from people internal to your organization.
Thanks, Corbin. Before we conclude, Richard, do you want to talk a little bit about the Riskonomics campaign that Frank touched upon?
Sure, Mita. So we actually have a Riskonomics campaign now for those MPs that are in desperate need for PDUs. The program itself, there's actually a DVD associated with it. There's a book on Riskonomics, and then at the end of you reviewing the DVD and the book, we actually have a synopsis that one needs to write, and there are the laws of Riskonomics that are contained within the book. Once they submit the synopsis, we'll actually review it. If it meets the level of standard that we require here at PQC, that person will then receive 35 PDUs for going through the process.
Right. So all that they need to do is submit a synopsis at the end of them reading the book or watching the DVD, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, team. I'm confident everyone enjoyed this session as much as I did. But before we close for the day, I'd like to ask everybody in the audience to take the automatic survey that pops up at the end of the session. We will also send a follow-up email with a PDU certificate and a link to this recorded webinar to you tomorrow. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a wonderful day.